going to start by removing this hubcap and then the wheel. If you don't have steel wheels with the hubcaps, then you don't have to worry about this. But for me, 19mm socket, remove these plastic caps that hold the hubcap on. Take this off and set it aside. Continuing with the 19mm socket, take off all 5 of your lug nuts and then remove the wheel. Okay, this wheel's stuck, so let's put on a lug nut and then hit the tire from the back side. With a rubber mallet, hit the tire, not the rim. You don't want to damage the rim. There we go. Take the lug nut off and remove the wheel. Now to take this drum off, it's pretty stuck on here, so I sprayed some rust penetrant in between the studs and around the center hub here. And I'm just going to use my hammer on different parts of it and hopefully break it free. There we go. It's off. Before I continue, I want to use some brake parts cleaner on this whole thing and remove the dust that's here. I don't want to breathe it in or getting it in the air more than I already did. So just clean it all off. All right, so before I take off the bolts that hold the wheel bearing on, I want to disconnect this ABS sensor. There's a clip that if you come in from up top and kind of pry it back, you can remove the wiring harness. And it's hard to see and hard to reach. There it goes. So here's the connector. Set it aside. I'm actually just going to pop it out of here so that it's out of my way completely. All right, now let it hang here. And then with a 15mm deep socket, you need a deep one so you can clear the stud here. You want to take off the 4 bolts that hold this on. There's one. Take the 2 nuts and remove them, and then we can take this wheel bearing right off. Now with my hammer, I'm going to hammer on the wheel bearing. I'm going to start by removing this spring here. I'm using some needle nose locking pliers. I find those the best tool to use for doing brake shoes, just because they lock onto the springs and the spring can't fly off. With some locking pliers, I'm going to clamp on to these springs here, or the caps on the springs, press in and twist. To unlock it, I'm holding the pin on the back side. Remove that, remove the pin, and save it for reinstallation. Let's do the same to this other one over here. Remove it, press it through. To remove this spring on the back side, I'm going to lock in some locking pliers nice and tight. And there we go. Just trying to unhook it from there. Release that. Now your shoes are free at the top, and you can pull them off. Everything comes apart. There we go. And last thing that's here is this parking brake lever. That's the last thing holding the shoes on. So press back on the spring, and you just want to pull this end through. There we go. At this point, I have these hose pinching pliers, and I'm going to pinch off the brake hose gently, not a lot. You don't want to damage it. This is going to restrict brake flow when I open the fitting here for the brake cylinder. I have to do this in order to get this backing plate off. I don't want to stretch my brake line. So with a 13mm, go ahead and break this free. Hopefully yours is not stuck. A lot of times what happens is the fitting starts spinning with the line and it twists the whole thing and then wants to rip the line off. So if that happens to you, just go back and forth little by little, spray it with some rust penetrant, and hopefully you can get it to break free. But basically what you want to do is just remove this all the way. There we go. This is off. Almost no fluid, or no fluids coming out. It's perfect. And I put 2 bolts back on this wheel hub while I was taking the brake shoes off just so it's secure. So let's take those off and then we'll pull the whole backing plate away. Now let's pull this whole thing away. It's still attached with the parking brake cable, but that's fine. At least now I have it here and I can hammer this down. Be careful, because if it breaks free, it's going straight down at the floor. I'm just going to reheat this a little bit and then try to hammer it out one more time and hopefully it breaks free. All right, I have this set up over here. Let's try and hammer it out one more time. Heat does the trick. I'm going to wire brush this, and especially inside of this groove here, so that the bearing does not get stuck again, as well as the backing plate. So I'm going to do the same to both. I want to clean up the area well. If yours is a lot more rusted than this, you can use some sort of a scraper or sanding disc even. Just get it nice and clean. You want a flat area for the bearing to mount on here, and then we'll apply some anti-seize everywhere. Like I said, I'm going to do this backing plate as well. Make sure the groove is nice and clean. Just like that. Do the same to the front side here. This is a little more flaky on this side, so it's important that you have it clean. You don't want the bearing to get caught between a little flake of rust and the backing plate, and then it sits crooked, and then you have odd feelings when you're driving. All right, this is, I'd say, good enough for mounting the bearing. Spray this, or brush it on, whatever you have, if it's the brushed kind. Usually the brushed kind makes a little bit less of a mess. Let's spray the back side here. And a little bit on the front side. Perfect. Get the new wheel bearing, slide it through, just like that. Then line it up with the holes on the axle beam, push it through, and let's get the nuts on. Start on all 4 of these nuts, and then we'll snug them up and torque them. These bottom ones are a little tricky to start, just because you can't really get to them. If you have trouble, you can always use your extension and kind of slide it on there with the extension. All right, let's snug them all up. I'm going to go in a cross pattern. That way, when I suck this wheel bearing up onto the axle beam, it seats itself evenly. So I'm going to start with this one up here, and then move on to this one down here. Then, oops, still good? Mm-hmm. Then go down to this one. And finally back up to this one. 33 foot-pounds. Okay, at this point we can reconnect the ABS sensor. So lock it back into its clip here, bring it under, press it in, and make sure it clicks into place right there. Now let's put this brake line back in. Okay, let's snug it up. Nice and tight, and we can release our pliers, which restricted the brake flow. And of course, we'll have to bleed this wheel, so take these off. And before I move any further, in order to make sure that everything is good, I'm going to open up this bleeder screw. Okay, Let's try to open this bleeder screw. There we go. Brake fluid will come out as well as some air bubbles. Let's let all the air bubbles flow out of this. That way we make sure we have no air in the system. And once that's done, you can either close it off and call it done, or perform a full manual brake bleed, which I recommend. All right, this is pretty much good. Let's close it off. Okay, snug it. Clean up your mess here so it doesn't look like there's a leak. And now don't forget to cap it off with this rubber cap. This will ensure that no debris makes its way inside of the bleeder screw, because if it does, it's going to clog it up. Perfect. I'm going to reinstall this little boot here before I forget. That way it's watertight. Let's scrape off all the debris that has built up on this backing plate to make sure it's nice and clean for the brake shoes. Before I install this adjuster, I want to clean it and lubricate it. This one's already basically brand new looking, so I don't have to clean anything, but I will grease it up. That way it doesn't rust in the future and it operates smoothly. Just put a little bit of grease on these threads here, and the grease will work its way in there, and then you can adjust it to work the grease into this little adjuster. Add some grease on the other end. You don't need a whole lot, just enough to cover the threads. And bring it back. Perfect. Now we can wipe off the excess and install it. Let's grease up the backing plate right on these 3 raised areas where the shoes sit. It's going to help them slide smoothly and quietly. Do the same on this side. Make sure that you grab the right brake shoe, and the lever basically for the parking brake has to sit on the front of it, not on the back side. Pull back on this spring, and let's reattach the cable onto this lever. I locked some locking pliers on here. Slide the parking brake shoe in, unlock your pliers. You can do this by hand too, it just kind of hurts to pull the spring back. Take your pin, put it through the backing plate, and then put it right through this shoe. Make sure the shoe is sitting kind of where it's supposed to. Put the spring back on here. Bring the shoe where it needs to be, and line up the pin with this cap. Once it's through, rotate it 90 degrees to lock it on. Let go. Position your shoe, and now this is secured. Let's get this spring, and there's actually a hole right behind here. That's where this spring needs to go. It's hard to see. So this spring on the back side for the top goes right in that little slot there. It's pretty hard to get on, but if you find the right angle, you can get it on. At this point, let's get the forward shoe with the adjuster and this lever. Everything has to already be on here when you go to put it in. Set it down where it's supposed to go, and now at this point you can take this pin, slide it through the back side, through the front here, hold the shoe, start the spring on, put on this cap, and let's lock it on. Line it up with the direction of the pin, press it on, turn it 90 degrees, unlock your pliers, make sure the shoe is still in position. Perfect. This is all still in here. Now you want to grab that spring at the back, and it actually hooks into this hole right here. Grab this spring with locking pliers. There we go. You kind of have to just like bend the locking pliers, or twist them, I guess, not bend them, until that hooks on. Let's get this lever back in, to slide it up, and then press it onto that pin there. That's what locks it in. Now expand this adjuster until it bottoms out up against the shoes. just like that. We'll adjust it further later. Last thing is the spring on the bottom. That goes in here, and this one's a tough one because it's pretty big, so I need my large needle nose locking pliers. I'm going to lock them on super tight and try to stretch it over. Stretch it, bring it over, press it into place. It's not fully seated. I'm going to grab my hammer and just press it into place. There we go. Get the shoe back into position. It was kind of sliding down. Let's reattach the spring for this adjuster lever. It hooks on with the shorter side onto the lever, and then the longer side actually goes right into that hole over there. So grab it with your locking pliers and pull it down. Hook it in. Make sure it's seated. All right, now this is able to self-adjust as the brakes wear out. Okay, so just make sure the shoes are lined up. This one kind of fell down a little too, so bring it up. All right, center them. You don't want them to be leaning to one side or the other, then the drum won't go on. Make sure that everything is into position. Sometimes they fall off on the bottom here, and they'll be sitting on top of this retainer. Everything looks good. Nothing is loose. I'm gonna tension up this adjuster. Perfect. Let's get the drum on and then adjust the shoes. Spray some anti-seize on the hub area here. Try not to get it on the brake shoes too much, but this will prevent the drum from sticking on in the future. And this should slide right on. If it doesn't, that means the shoes are adjusted too far out, but this actually sounds pretty good. I do need to tighten them up a little bit. But what you want is actually with the wheel on is the best way to go by it. You want the shoes to have enough friction to stop the wheel or slow it down after 1.5 turns. So with no brake pressure applied or parking brake engaged at all, with the wheel on, spin it, and you want no more than 1.5 turns on the wheel. So without the wheel, that would be about maybe half a turn to a turn because the weight of the wheel will keep it going. So let's take this back out and expand these shoes a little bit because this is a little too free-flowing for my liking. So twist this, I'm turning it down, and this pushes the shoes out a little bit. Do little by little because a small adjustment will actually make a big difference. So let's get the drum back on and see what that did. Okay, that's pretty good, but it's still a little bit too free-flowing, but I can feel a slight difference, so I'm actually going to keep going a little bit. All right, let's go about there and see what this did. Okay, this feels better. Okay, so I think right about there is good. I'm spinning it, and after about half a turn, it stops. If for some reason you need to adjust it after the wheel is on, take that rubber boot off at the back and you'll get a screwdriver in here and reach the adjuster wheel with the wheel on. So let's get this back and let's put the wheel on. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Okay, let's get the hubcap on. When you put on this hubcap, make sure that this little slot lines up with your valve stem. If it doesn't, it's just going to get crushed when you put the hubcap back on. And use your 19mm and just screw these little plastic caps on. This is what secures this onto the wheel, so if you don't tighten these up, well, it could fly off on you. So make sure these are nice and snug, but don't use your air gun or electric gun on this because you'll strip them out. Just do these by hand. All right, take it for a road test.